Hello, my name is Kuba Stępień. I'm a software engineer at CodiLime. Today I want to present you a quick demo of promising tool that can really help you build and maintain your test or development environment. Why it is so important? Well, whatever you do, no matter if you are working on a front-end, back-end, one or many services, or perhaps you are preparing some manifest for deployments or working on some Kubernetes resources or tools. Anyway, sooner or later, you will need an environment on which you can build, deploy, verify your code. Having that bits automated might increase your overall efficiency and your developer experience. And if I told you that all of these can be executed in the background or on your local operating system, well, there is such a tool and it's called Tilt. At the beginning, I would like to quickly introduce it a bit, what it is, how it works in general, and what its main features are. We will highlight some of its key advantages, why you should at least give it a try. I would like to also point some of use cases when I think it is worth to add it into your project. But the main part of this presentation will be a demo of configuring and using Tilt for a small microservice application. Tilt main slogan is Kubernetes for production and Tilt for development. And modern apps are made of many services. A lot of teams are trying to find the best way to set up environments to run their services so they can work on them and verify their behavior in an environment close to the production line, which in many cases is not a trivial task, as we need to start services in the right order, update them in place, and monitor when something is failing on a daily basis. And we should not spend a lot of time trying to spin it up every time we introduce a change to the source code. And although Tilt's main goal and focus is about Kubernetes and microservices, it can be used also apart from that ecosystem for some other cases, thanks to its automation and a quick feedback. As a kind of recommendation, it is worth to mention that Tilt was acquired, or actually the Tilt team and Tilt project joined Docker in 2022. So it might be that we will see its features in Docker Desktop, for instance, in the near future. But anyway, plans are that Tilt will stay open source. Tilt supports Linux, Mac, and Windows. It has a simple command line and a graphical interface to monitor your resources. You can configure its behavior to achieve whatever you need, and Tilt should keep your resources always updated whenever you change your source code, your dependencies, manifests, etc. Additionally, the team behind Tilt is also responsible for an application called CodiLime, which simplifies local Kubernetes cluster creation on top of Kubernetes solution you choose. So it might be Kind, K3D, or Minikube, for instance. After installing Tilt, you will get one command line tool to work with. This command line tool consumes a file called tilt file. Tilt file itself has to be written in Starlog. It's a dialect of Python. So instead of preparing another YAML file, you can write an actual code to create your environment. Tilt provides many domain-specific functions, as well as possibility to write, use, and share your own extensions. That gives more flexibility in creating and configuring environment. But let's work on some example of our own to explore some of the Tilt features. Okay, so I have Tilt already installed, as well as CodiLime, which I will use to create a local Kubernetes cluster. And let's start with that. So I'm using Kind cluster with a local image registry. It's just a one node cluster. And at the end, I'm exporting kubeconfig to a file. Okay. Our application is a well-known to-do example, but a bit overcomplicated. And we have 3 backend services, one in Golang acting as an API server, one in Python as a main backend service, and we have also database. It is MongoDB. Additionally, we have a front-end service in React, but let's focus on the backend side of it. And to start working with tilt, we need to create a tilt file. Let me just switch the syntax, as the Starlark is a Python, a dialect. Let's use Python. So we want our services to be deployed on this local cluster. To deploy services based on manifest, there is built-in function called KNS-YAML, which takes a path as an argument, a path to our manifest. Let's start with the database. So it's under services, database. Okay, let's see what tilt will do with such tilt file. There is tilt app command to start tilt with our tilt file, and by default tilt will use a file called tilt file, but we can also specify it as an argument. So let's run it. Now we have an option to open a browser with a graphical interface, or we can stay in the terminal using this legacy terminal mode. Let's stick to the terminal, at least for now. And we have our first error. It's error image pullback of. So, yep, that is fair enough, as we haven't built our image yet. To build image using Docker, there is a Docker build command, which needs at least a reference. And when tilt creates its resource, it using our manifests. So we need to specify the reference in Docker build, which will be the image name of the deployed resource. Let's check the image name in our manifest. And let's copy it here. Okay. Then we need, as in regular Docker build command, we need context, which in this case will be the path to the database directory. And we need to specify the Docker file. Let's save it. As you can see, tilt is rebuilding the resources, and yeah, actually the image is already built, and tilt is pushing it to our local registry. Here we can see the logs. By the default, we have both build log from the Docker build, and we have runtime logs merged in one output, but we can stick to the build logs or see only the runtime logs. And yeah, the database service is up and running. So let's add another services. And yeah, perhaps the Python one now. So whenever we save the tilt file, tilt is rebuilding. And the last backend service will be our API server. Yeah, everything is running. So normally I will export the ports to start using it at testing. But having tilt, we can actually add that to our configuration script. To do that, we will use KNS resource function. And we need to specify the name of our resource, which in case of API is this one. And we have to specify which ports we want to forward. Okay, it's already done. So let's just quickly test it. Let's check some of the endpoints. Yeah, we can use this health check for quick test. Let's use curl as we have it exported. Yep, it is working. Let's see the graphical interface. So what we need to do right now is just press enter, and that will open our interface, and we have all our resources and the relevant logs. As in case of terminal mode, we can also see the Docker build log or the runtime, or just merge them into one output. We can see also the logs from the tilt execution, and tilt is tracking all the changes, which causes the rebuild. So in our case, we're only updating the tilt file. But let's just rebuild one of the services based on change in that service. We can use the API for that. And for example, let's just do that. And yeah, as you can see, tilt is building an image, and after that it's being pushed, and then deployment is re-executed. So now when we check that, yep. Okay, one interesting thing regarding the port forwarding is that we can actually see that also on a graphical interface. So in case of our API server, which port we forward, we have this link under the resource in the graphical user interface. And we can do one thing with that. So the port forward argument takes actually port forward object, so we can create such. And what we need to specify is our local and remote ports, but we can also specify the name for that port forward. Let's call it API. So after tilt rebuild it, actually what it does, it just changed the link on graphical user interface. Cool. To clear all the resources, there is tilt down command. And now it's, or should be, terminated. We can check that. Yeah, the Python service is still terminating. Let's wait a bit. And I mentioned that we can use tilt to create the environment close to the production one. So for example, if our real app is deployed with some ingress like Nginx, we can also apply it to our local environment. As I'm using tilt with kind cluster, I need to additionally install ingress resources, and to do that, I prepared the function called install ingress, which is using the built-in tilt function called local to execute local command. So I specify kubectl apply to apply the needed manifest for the ingress, and kind to use that in our build file. There is load command, which needs a path to this additional tilt file, and we have to specify what we want to import. Now we can run that command, call it. It needs kubeconfig. That's why I exported it. Okay. Do we have everything clean up? Yep. So let's start tilt again. And we can now deploy our ingress configuration using the same kns yum function. I have ingress manifest, so now it should be deployed. Yep. And let's see that. Okay, so we have to access our API server using the ingress, we need to add additional prefix to our path. As I have nginx port 80 forwarded as well, thanks to my kind cluster configuration, I can use it. So this additional path. Okay. And it is working. Let's switch to the graphical interface. As you can see, we have this to-do ingress resource or object shown as uncategorized. And that's because Teal doesn't know how to name it or label it. And it can be updated using the same KNS resource function, which needs this object name, as I think, yeah, objects argument. That will be a list, and the name is to-do ingress. Okay. We can then specify a new name for that. Let's call it ingress. Let's save the file, and we have name ingress. Yeah, that's cool. Having the ingress deployed and running, we could remove the port forwarding from the API server itself. But maybe sometimes you need to test it with ingress and sometimes without ingress. We can actually also modify the tilt command and add some additional arguments. Let me just quickly clean the resources. And there is the config object, which has define function. So we can define Boolean argument or string, etc. Let's use Boolean, and we need to specify a name. We can also add usage, but let's just use the name. So for example, we can add an argument called with ingress. Then it can be used additionally to the up command, like this. And having that defined, we need to only pass it. So let's call it pass config. Okay, so that will load what we actually provided in the tilt up command. And that will be a dictionary, so we can take the value of this argument And for example, in case it was specified, we will install ingress and do all of that. And in case we don't need ingress, we will forward our ports. Let's try that. So let's try without ingress. We have, oh yeah, that's my bad. Okay, that's the dictionary. So yeah, now we have our services deployed without ingress. When we clean that up and we decided that we need our ingress, we can just run it like so. And now we have our ingress. Cool. All right. But there was one thing missing in our environment. So we can now build and deploy what we need. But we also want to run some tests. In the mention file, I have also prepared the additional function for tests. So we have our backend integration tests, let's call them that. And we have a Docker file for them, but they are using Docker Compose. So we don't want to deploy that on Kubernetes, but we want to just create a local container to run the test against our Kubernetes deployment. And to do that, I use the same Docker build command to build the image and Docker Compose to actually run the container with tests. So we can input that. Let's go tests. And we can run it. So I think it's taking the boolean. So in case of ingress, it will use the ingress endpoint URL, and without ingress, it will use the port provider. So let's just pass this boolean here. So we have our tests deployed and running, and they are failing at the moment with the error that API server is not helpful. Let's look at that. That's the code for our tests. And the first thing what is executed is actually checking the health check URL. And we are expecting the text OK being sent. And I think we change that. So let's fix it. Now we have our API server rebuilt, and we can update, or actually it's already rebuilt by the tilt, and now we have our test passed. That's really cool. Okay, we can try to actually add some different bug, like for example, as we are testing get and post method, let's just mess something up with the post. We can return empty list instead of our list of our to-dos. It's still rebuilding. We can re-trigger our tests. Yep. And we have, as expected, post test fail. Having that test example, I have also used the live update functionality. So we can specify which files has to be copied to the container. In case of Docker Compose, it is a container. In case of Kubernetes pod, it will be our pod. But we can also specify additional command that needs to be executed inside of that container based on what actually was changed. So for example, in case of our tests, we have the requirements file that needs to trigger reinstalling those dependencies. We can check that out. So where is that? Here we have our requirements. Let's just update it. And as you can see, tilt synchronize the file. So it copied our requirements and then re-execute our tests. Cool. Let me clear that one more time. Okay, so having that possibility to implement any functionality that we need to be covered by our environment, it's really easy to extract them into different files that can be imported and loaded when needed. So we can prepare different setups for different needs. Like for example, I have one tilt file for the backend integration, and one tilt file for the whole end-to-end bit. So the end-to-end one will additionally build and deploy the front-end service. So we can run that. And additionally, we can add more tools we need. Like, for example, we can add or install service meshes or add additional tools for observability and experiment with those on our local environment. Let's try that. So as you can see, I defined the additional flags. Tilt up. So now Tilt will deploy our backend services, our front-end service, and any additional tool I need or I want to test, check, play around with. So I have them labeled as a backend services. There's this our front. We have our ingress as well. Still, we have service mesh and some observability tools. Let's wait a bit for all of them to be deployed. Okay. So you want to check that on, for example, Ellie, I have port forwarded for that. Let's go. And we have our Kelly. So we can see all our services in that tool. And again, any changes I made to the our source code will be reflected by the tilt. So yeah, that was fun. So why to use tilt? Because of faster development cycles. With tilt, you can quickly build, deploy your software, and run your test against it. The environment itself is isolated from other applications running on your system. And for me as a developer, it is also important that it is really easy and fun to work with tilt. And thanks to Starlike, I can prepare tidy steps that I can reuse in different projects, parameterize them. And one more thing that really stands out is that tilt does not trying to be a complex all-in-one solution, but it is focused on local development. Of course, you can use it for stage or even production deployments, but there are better tools for that. And Tilt defines itself strongly as a local development toolbox. And I think thanks to that clear purpose, it is built and it works really well. And as it seems quite natural to use Tilt in case of microservices, any Kubernetes native app, but Tilt can be part of any project. So you can focus on code and leave build and deploy to be automated by Tilt. You can ask, what if we have many repositories for our source code, like one repo per service? So you can have one Tilt file covering them all. You can have one Tilt file per repo covering what is needed for that particular service. And you can load them in whatever way it is better for your integrations. You can find many educative templates and examples in Tilt documentation, which, by the way, is really quite good. Topics that we have not covered, but are also very helpful, like running Tilt in CI mode. With that, you will build, deploy, run your local resources like tests, and then after that, Tilt would clean up all of it. And it's possible to use remote clusters and remote image registries. And one more feature that looks really interesting is snapshots. So you can create a snapshot of your whole environment with deployed applications, and you can share it with your teammates or any third parties like QAs, etc. You can learn more from the Tilt and Tilt extensions documentation. Links will be somewhere below the video. And that will be it from my side. I hope you find it interesting and you will give Tilt a try, because it's really good and helpful tool. Thank you for watching. See you next time.